Can we get a vowliness counter going on? Like how many times I say vowliness in my video? How's it? Oh, fuck. Ah. And I am not trying that again. What's going on, Acolyte Squad? My name is Oliver, and welcome to part 2 of the Fox Stevenson's The Heat bass tutorial. So in the first episode, we went over the first kind of main sound that you hear in the drop, which is this. Ooh, this. So that was the first video, and I will put a link to the first video in the description if you want to check that out. In this episode, we're going to be going over the rest of the basses that kind of give it the fullness and vocality. I'm still trying to figure out whether that's a word. The vocality of the sound. So I'm going to play the demo again, just so you can hear the layers that we're going to be going through this time.
Take the heat.
Cool. So as you can hear with the first bass that I showed you, it's got very little voice going on in it. Like, it doesn't sound like an open mouth as much as it does when it's layered with all the growls. And that's because all of the, here we go again, the vocality, the voweliness of the sound exists in the other basses. So if I take off this main one and play it now, whoops, it's got to be here. Yeah, this. So that's doing the main vocal and like bass sound for the whole sound. The lead is just on top of it. Cool. And even if it's not perfectly exactly like his, it's just a really cool sound that I think if you use these techniques to make your own sounds, it can turn out really cool. So let's start with the first bass. Well, it's less of a bass, more of a synth, but I used it by cloning this lower bass and just turning into like something that you could play chords with. So this is just one of the elements that's going on underneath. Alright, so let's go through this. Oscillator A is basic shapes, and I've got the wavetable position on 2. The unison is at 2, and the detune is at 0.03, and level is all the way down. Nothing else on there. The noise oscillator is on AC hum 1, which is under organics. And then level is all the way down, and I didn't touch anything else. The effects, I have hyperdimension on with the rate at 14%, and the mix is at 21%. Didn't touch dimension. Distortion is hard clip with the drive at 65%, and mix is at 81%. And then lastly, I've got a multiband compressor with the threshold at negative 12.3 decibels and the release at 470.2 milliseconds. And multiband is on. Just makes it all crisper. Alright, so LFO1 is going to the level, going up to 73. And it's also going to the level of the noise, going up 25. Cool. So I have no filters on this, so you might be wondering where it's getting the vocalness from. Alright, in the comments, tell me, what can I use for vocalness as a substitute that actually makes sense and is a word that exists? Because right now, that's the only word that I know. Vocality, vocalness, voweliness? I don't know. Let me know, because I need help. I'm just going to be going through these effects, which is what makes the voweliness, once we're done with this bass here, which sounds like this. Nice. So with this sound, you've got the oscillator is the same thing, same settings, except the unison is at 1, and same settings on the noise oscillator as the last one, and the same settings on the LFO as the last one as well. And I'm pretty sure I just used different settings on the same effects as the last one. So I did rate at 14% and mix at 21% on the hyperdimension. Nothing on dimension. I have diode 2 on the distortion, which is right there. And the drive all the way up. But the mix is at 81%. Compressor threshold is at negative 9.9, and the release is at 470.2 milliseconds. Gain is all the way down, and multiband is on. And the LFO is doing the exact same thing as the last one because I just copied and pasted the preset. Cool. So let's go through the effects for this. First thing is I'm just cutting it off a very sharp brick wall at about 164 hertz. Next I've got a stereo enhancer, just bringing the just making it a little bit more stereo. A saturation knob at 5.2, and then Serum effects. Oh wait. And then Serum effects just with an EQ, and I am automating the frequency of this cutoff, which begins at 76 hertz with the Q at 60%, and it's a cutoff. And the last thing I did was just make the second band a cutoff and put the frequency to about 9,600 hertz and put the Q down a little bit to 46, just to cut out any unwanted high frequencies that you don't hear as much of in his song. Yeah, so this is the automation that I made for the vocalness. And next is this kind of growly bass. It sounds horrible on its own, but it just adds a lot to how open the mouth sounds. That you can't really pinpoint when the whole sound is playing, but when you hear it on its own, you can really hear how much of a difference it's making. Alright, so we've got oscillator A is on Monster 5, which is under Spectral, Monster 5. Octave is at -1, Unison is at 6, Detune is at 0.1, wavetable position is at 113, and the FM is at 43%. Oscillator B is at 4088, which is under Analog. Wavetable position is at 0, Unison is at 6, and Detune is at 0.1 as well, and the level is all the way down. Now the first filter is a band 12 filter, which is under Normal. Cutoff is at 86 hertz, resonance is at 47%, fatness is at 27%, and drive is at 10%, and mix is all the way up, and you only need to put it on oscillator A. Under the effects tab, we have hyperdimension. So hyper is at 40%. I didn't touch any of that stuff, and the mix is all the way down to be modulated. Distortion, we got hard clip with the drive at 68%, and the mix is at 64%. The phaser is at 0, depth is at 48%, and frequency is at 134 hertz. Not anymore, but I guess that doesn't matter too much. Feed is at 46%, and mix is at 47%. EQ, frequency is at 51 hertz, or it wasn't before, but I just moved it, so I guess now put it to 51 hertz. It's at a cutoff, and the Q is 60%. And then the top one is also a cutoff with the frequency at 1,467 hertz, with the Q at 44. It was at 44, and the gain at 5.3 decibels, which doesn't matter because it's a cutoff. Compressor, got the threshold to -10.2 decibels. Ratio didn't touch. Release is at 458.2 milliseconds. Gain didn't touch, and multiband is on. Cool, so what I have on that is an EQ, cutting about the same frequencies as the other ones. And then I'm boosting 1,200 hertz, up like 5-ish decibels, just to get that mid kind of frequency that the vocality of the growl exists in. Like when you hear the vocalness, you don't hear it in the bass or the high end. It exists in like this area going up and down. And then the last thing I did was just cut off the high end at about 7,500 hertz. Next I have a saturation knob on, going up 1.9, and it just adds some nice distortion to it. So, and then lastly a fruity stereo enhancer, And I'm just making that quite a bit wider, just so it fills in the space more that the other sounds aren't touching. Whoops. You can barely hear it, but it fills it in, and it gives it more of that mid-range, which is what we boosted there. Last thing we got is a sub bass, which you wouldn't think would be of interest because it's literally just a sub. But I actually have some effects on it that sound real good. Alarm clock. Alright, so I have a lot of saturation on here. Now you might be noticing that there isn't actually bit crush on it, and saturation doesn't do that to the sound. It's because this is getting routed to this mixer track, which I'm using as the sidechain, but I also have saturation on here, which is at 2.2, and Serum effects, which I have a compressor with the threshold at negative 15.7 decibels, release at 389 milliseconds, and gain all the way down. Ratio's at 1.8. It's just giving it that extra distortion that we want. That'll like come through even on laptop speakers. And then the last thing I did was just so I just used the cutoff to cut some of the high ends that weren't there in his mastered version. And actually everything is being routed to that. So if I unmute, all these, they're all going to this because I want them all to be sidechained, and they've all got the same effects on it. And so the distortion kind of glues them all together. And then this is without it. Cool. And then I've just got a volume shaper on, which is doing this, and then I'm using the ghost kick method of sidechain. So that's it for the sounds. In the last episode that I'll be posting on Thursday, we're just going to be going through how I made all of these elements go along with the song and kind of like mesh with the song. Even though it's not perfect, it still could have been a lot worse if I hadn't done this stuff. We're also going to go through how I mastered it to make it sound as close to the original as possible. So stick around and subscribe if you want to get notified about that last episode. And then on the Sunday, I've got a pretty cool bass that got requested. It was a Morden hypnotized bass that I've been working on recently, and it's actually pretty awesome. So stay tuned for that too. So if you enjoyed this video, please forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.